Okay, the introduction to the Anglo-Saxon period. You can see that you don't necessarily need it started in 449 to whatever. Don't worry about those. More focus on the time era, like the 5th century and so on. If you look on this page, it lasts 1,000 years because we connect it with the medieval times. You may have heard the phrase Dark Ages. This is all a lot of years pass during this time. We have Rome. When they are in control, they provide a stable economy, they provide protection, they have all of these, all of the positives that Rome and Italy have is spread up into the English countryside now, up in this area. But when they decide to leave, all of that goes with them, and it opens up all of the borders to the other countries to come in and try to take control. If you think about a map of Europe, okay, that big map of Europe, Rome pretty much controls most, if not all of that. Didn't you take, when do you take your world history class? Freshman year. Okay, you remember this? Did you ever see maps and such? It spread into Africa, Western Asia, and then people started to invade them. The Moors and other people started to influence the realm of Rome. And so Rome, if you look back the previous page, England and Scotland, it's just a little country, a little island. They need their forces, their legions elsewhere, and so that's why they pulled out of the northwest of the territory of the continent and help, protect their civilization down on the other side of the strait and so on. Vikings, the Normans we see on this page. So we have all of these Germanic tribes, the Scandinavian countries. Pretty much everybody's like, hey, Rome's gone. We're going to infiltrate and we're going to take over. So one tribe takes over, then there's a war, and another one takes. So it's a lot of bloodshed, a lot of war. Okay, we see, and we'll talk more about it later. But religion, these pagan cultures, these cultures start influencing and taking things from this culture to this culture. And religion, the pagan society has multiple gods. It isn't monotheistic like Christianity is, where you have one God. They have several gods. You may remember back with if you ever studied mythology. The god of war, the god of harvest, and they have gods for everything. The pagans believed did not have a heaven and a hell. They did not live their lives, I must follow these commandments in order to blah, blah, blah. Their afterlife. No, there was no afterlife. It was darkness, a box. They didn't have the beliefs of afterlife. But when they died, they believed that it was fate. If they were to die in battle, it was because it's fate. It's going to happen. So since there is no heaven or hell, the only way that they could achieve immortality and have an afterlife is if they produce such a wonderful story while they were alive. They are so heroic, their feats were just tremendous, that people talk about them later. Whether nowadays we have athletes that did, man, that shot. There are certain people, athletes who, human beings, in high school, they hit the game-winning shot. The rest of their life is just downhill. But they always have that one thing to talk about. And people always talk about. There was a TV show in the 90s called Married with Children. I don't know if you ever saw it. Al Bundy is the main character. Some chuckling. Do you know what his high school moment is that he always holds on to? This guy's pushing 50, and he keeps pushing, holding out to the hope that, I can be a football star because I had one game at Polk High where I scored how many touchdowns? 5 touchdowns in one game. Al Bundy, the legend. He still remembers that. Okay? In his own mind, he's immortal. Now imagine if, there was won some state championship or something, and it influences other people. People are going to remember that person. When that person dies, people will still remember them and have that story. Man, remember in high school when they did that? Or later in life when they invented whatever. So here we have, and you see it later in the pages, they have W-Y-R-D, weird. That's fate. It's meant to be. If it happens, it happens. If they are to die, God of whatever thinks that, we will die. So the Vikings and the Normans instilled a lot of their cultures cultural beliefs, and as the next group took over and the next one took over, they could borrow from different cultures and create what they have. But the pagan society ran rampant throughout this era. We see Christianity start to seep in, and then ultimately take over through this time period. But predominantly it was a pagan society early on. And we'll talk more about Christianity later on. Feudal England, page 11 there. When I think of the Middle Ages, I think of feudalism. If you recall, the serfs and the fiefs and the lords and all of those things, and I'll give you some land, but you've got to give me half of your crops. Oh, and if I ever go to war, you will go and fight for me. It's kind of I don't want to say it's bartering like you at a little a street fair or something, but yet there's an exchange of goods for services or services for services, and so on. War and plague, we already mentioned that there's a lot of bloodshed. There's a PowerPoint that I have online that you can take a look at that talks about, during this time period, a third of the population to half of the population dies for war, for plague. You've all heard, the bubonic plague, and there were several, Black Death. They have all of these different plagues that just, hygiene wasn't great. People have to empty their toilets in a city. Where does it go? The street. The pot goes out the window into the street. Imagine a nice hot summer day. Walking down the street, things floating by in the gutters. Or worse, just sitting there. You got to watch where you're going if people are chucking things out a second floor window. That could ruin your day real fast. I mean, just think, obviously, the hygiene is horrible. Maybe it wouldn't be such a good idea to be so close to other people. And maybe you go live out by the woods. But you go live out by the woods, you cease to fall under the protection of that group. So you kind of trade off. So the war and plague, it's rough there. You read about King John there in the Magna Carta. Have you heard of King John before? This particular one? What legendary, controversial / mythical individuals associated with King John? Robin Hood. Very good. And you all remember the cartoon Robin Hood or the movies Robin Hood. Prince John just raises taxes and does whatever he wants. Well, we see in real life the Magna Carta was created, and it started to take some of that power away from the king to just randomly do whatever he wants. The king is still ultimately the most powerful person, but yet there is, he can't go and do certain things. And so we see the first kind of legal system is the wrong word, but the first type of government or self-government being instituted on an individual who had pretty much absolute power at the time. So we start to see some sort of, early on when Rome leaves, it's chaos. And now we're starting to see some order. So that's important, that we start to see civilization take hold during this Middle Age time. Big idea one, the epic warrior. And we'll talk more about him when we get into Beowulf more. The warrior society, I talked about the fiefdoms and the serfdoms and the lords. You protect me and I'll protect you, that type of thing. The kings weren't prevalent during this time period. And so the people who won the wars and fought the wars, they were the warlords. Okay? They were the most powerful people. This is still going on in certain places in Africa nowadays. Have you seen those, the stories with the little kids with machine guns and stuff? They're not a government army. They are with warlords. Okay? Whether it's blood diamonds or drugs or whatever going around. It's rough. And they have an undying loyalty. Okay? It was embarrassing if your leader died but you survived. Wouldn't you consider that a score? Yay, I'm still alive. But here it's, wow, they died and I survived. I am horrible. How could I let him? That type of thing. Just total guilt and embarrassment. And conversely, it's for the warlord, if they lose, I let down all of these people. Do you see how it can't really be a win-win? Somebody's going to be upset every time. But it's just that fierce loyalty, that undying loyalty, unwavering loyalty that is evident of an epic warrior in this time period. Oral literature, when Rome took off, they took the whole society, they took the whole education system, whether it was great or not, it's gone. All these tribes coming in, the illiteracy isn't there, people don't speak same languages, things like that. There isn't people writing things down, it's all oral. You sit around a campfire, you talk, your dad tells you a story, you tell your kids tell that kids. You ever played a telephone game? I bet if we did a test in here, it would change just within this class. Imagine changing over generations. You see what I'm saying? Then generations, and then generations. And that's what Beowulf is. Ultimately, somebody decided, hey, I'm going to write this down. Okay? I'm going to write this story that's been told for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years from the pagan society. We're going to pass it along. But as you'll see in Beowulf, the Beowulf version we have, there's a heavy Christianity theme sprinkled throughout. Well, wait a minute, I thought you said it was the pagan society. It was a pagan culture. But whoever chose to write it down believed in Christianity. And so they could do whatever they want. And so they start putting in little Christianity allusions throughout. And you'll see those instantaneously when we start the piece later. The people who were the most educated, the people who knew how to read and write, were of what profession? Monks. And we can't go Xerox a copy of something if a parchment is falling apart and whittling away and, oh my God, that's 200 years old, that's the history of blah, 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 whatever. Open it up and I'm going to sit here for however long and I'm going to copy it. Takes a long time. Okay, that's your copy. Then this thing can whatever, and I have a new copy. So the story of Beowulf, a monk would sit down and, what's that story? Oh, yes. And they could put in whatever they want. And so you can see how Christianity starts to grow and develop and pass along through literature. And throughout this whole semester, we don't study or promote religion in this class, but through the literature you can see how it was very prevalent in the development of all of these different time periods and all these famous works. Okay, the writers, whatever they believed, was influenced in this writing, and so you'll be able to see those. And it's kind of neat to go from the multiple God aspect to, oh, look at the sprinkling of Christianity here, to ultimately in the 18th, 19th, 20th century, some of the real heavy believers of Christianity, and see what they produce. I've already spoke about the right-hand column there, the Germanic and Christian traditions. Christianity and so on is developed more and more throughout this time period. And that weird, the fate, the destiny. That's a word, weird is a word that I never heard before until this textbook. It was always just fate, destiny, that type of thing. But that's one of those terms that you really need to know. And that will be on your lit terms list. A big idea too, power of faith. We'll talk more about this down the road. And I've already talked about how important the religion is. But it's going to develop and develop. The pilgrimage, when we get talking about Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, that is a story of a religious pilgrimage. These people, group of eclectic people, get together and they travel to a religious location. Nowadays, Mecca? People can go to Mecca. People have these, I got to go to Jerusalem at some point in my life, things like that. They have these religious trips that they must go on. Okay? I don't necessarily think Mormons have, I'm ignorant on this, but I know that they usually take 2 years and go and do some sort of service work for their faith. That's kind of their religious soul-searching pilgrimage. Good. So we talk about monasteries, Christianity, pilgrimage, and we'll talk much more about that when we get to Canterbury Tales. And then lastly, the big idea 3, world of romance. So we had the epic warrior, we have the religion, and now we have romance. This is where, as you see in the picture, knight, courtly love, chivalry. I doubt, ladies, you talk about your boyfriend opening up a door and you go, oh my, how chivalrous. But people do consider, knightly qualities, being a upstanding man, as being chivalrous. And that's a word that is still thrown around today, and we'll define exactly what that is, the role of the knights. I took a course in college called Medieval Civilization. I was excited. I'm like, knights and jousting, and this will be awesome. It was horrible. Okay, because it was a whole semester over these 1,000 years. But we focused on, one of the tests was, we had this outline of Europe. Okay, and on the test, there were 7 distinct years. 1116, 1066, 893. We had to know these. And then we had to map it out. We had to shade, where's the Roman Empire? Shade it. We had to put X's where the Moor invasion is coming. And then 40 years later, how it's changed. I mean, it was just sick. It's horrible. But I learned a lot, which I forgot immediately after. But it was the most challenging class I ever had with regards to just sheer memorization. I remember afterwards I got on the bus at IU to take me to my car at the stadium so I could, because I lived off campus. And I just remember sitting there and I felt, I'm done. Good. I felt good about it because I just worked so hard. But that's just one of those classes I'm like, man, we didn't get any of that knight stuff that I really wanted. But here in this class, we will get knights. We will talk about King Arthur. We'll talk about Lancelot, his wife Guinevere, the Knights of the Round Table. There's a big fable story called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So we'll talk about what it is to be a knight, what that role is, what the importance and integrity of a knight should be. And then when we come across somebody who doesn't exemplify those or have those traits, how much of an embarrassment that person is to the culture. And so we'll talk about that down the road. The rise of romance, excuse me, there is some allusions throughout history that Guinevere, Queen Guinevere, Arthur's Guinevere, had a thing for Lancelot, knights, with women, that type of thing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But we start to see romance starting to come out in literature, in which this piggybacks up to, or I guess Renaissance piggybacks on this, but the Renaissance is sonnets and love poems. But we see the emergence of that in this era. Okay, so we get to see development as we go on. So, any questions?